my leg, and my arm, even my fingers. The body I've lost. The comrades I've lost won't stop hurting. It's like they're all still there. You feel it too, don't you?
When you need a horde of goblins at your disposal, who are you gonna call? Krenko Mob Boss, of course. He costs 2 and 2 red, and he has the activated ability when you tap him, create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. This easily combos off with other goblins, but most importantly combos off with Skirk Prospector and Mana Echo. Skirk's Prospector allows him to sacrifice any goblin and add red mana. And Mana Echoes is whenever a creature enters the battlefield, add amount of colorless mana equal to the number of creatures you control that share a creature type. It's very easy to go infinite with this, because as long as you can create more goblins than what Krenko's command cost would ever be, then you can essentially keep casting Krenko over and over, and as long as you have some way to give him haste, he essentially can just keep going off, keep sacrificing them, get enough mana sacrificing goblins, and keep going over and over until you have an infinite army. Some great guys to give you haste have to be Goblin Chieftain and Goblin War Chief, which give you guys haste and can reduce the cost of your goblins as well. This can also combo off with abilities that also untap him, such as Thornbite Staff, which allows him to get untapped as soon as a creature dies. This also combined with Goblin Bombardment will allow you to cause infinite goblins to be put onto the battlefield, then you can just sacrifice them with Goblin Bombardment and killing anybody at the table. So there are other ways to untap him, such as Staff of Domination, which you pay 3 and can untap him, or you can also use Umbral Mantle, which is the most common way to get things to be untapped. Another card that works well with him is Phyrexian Altar, which you can sacrifice any creature and add 1 mana of any color. As long as you have haste enablers like Goblin War Chief or Chieftain, there's also a number of other ways like Mass Hysteria, or the most commonly used one, which is Anger. You can essentially go infinite with goblins as well, as long as you have more goblins than what his command cost is, essentially. This can also pair greatly with other cards that can allow you to essentially get infinite combat steps or anything like that, like Aggravated Assault, which essentially you just pay enough mana and you can attack your creatures and go in straight away. Who, you may ask, may be the Goblin King? Some would say Muxus is, because of his amazing ability to get goblins out of your deck and right onto the battlefield. Others would say Dockside Extortionist, because he can just generate so much more mana than any other creature out there. But most importantly, a lot of people overlook Conspicuous Snoop just because he can play goblins off the top of your deck and also has any activated abilities of goblins. But really, the king of goblins has to be Kiki Jiki, the best combo out there for most combo decks back in the day. He costs 2 and 3 red, he has haste so he can activate his ability immediately, and his ability is whenever you tap him, create a token that's a copy of a target non-legendary creature you control. That token has haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. This combos off with not only goblins, but also other creatures that aren't even in his same color situation. As long as you have some way to either untap him or to make infinite copies, he can basically go off with a number of creatures or cards. The most common way to combo off with him is to either untap him or to make infinite copies of him. There's another way too, as well as flickering as well, but pretty much anything from Cool Celebrant to Veladar Guardian can basically make this card just an immediate combo off. There's also other cards that give him a variety of ways to also untap him or just make more copies of him. But it's all about just finding the right color combination that you're looking for that can just basically go off with him. But it's so easy to stumble into a combo with him that it's impossible not to actually combo off with him nowadays. And one of the cards I come back to a lot to just make sure I can finish off the job is usually Goblin Bombardment, which can basically utilize all the copies of him to make sure that he can at least do his job and kill everybody at the table with one move. One of my new favorite cards that is like Goblin Bombardment and can utilize your goblins to sacrifice themselves to damage opponents has to be the new Sling Gang Lieutenant. He costs 3 and 1 black. When he enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, and at any time you can sacrifice a goblin and a target player is going to lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. One of my favorite 2-card combos to utilize him has to be Ashiel's Altar and Nim Deathmantle, because you can sacrifice the goblins for colorless mana, and because Nim Deathmantle allows whenever a non-token creature is put into the graveyard, thus Sling Gang Lieutenant, you are essentially going to be able to pay 4 colorless mana and bring it right back onto the battlefield. And because Sling Gang Lieutenant creates 2 1/1s, you can essentially utilize them to always create that 4 colorless mana over and over, and then you can essentially sacrifice him with his own ability to make sure that he can always just ping an opponent. This will create an infinite loop where you can essentially just ping the entire table while bringing him back over and over and over again. He also can be utilized on a lot of other abilities that we've already talked about, anywhere from the Thornbite staff to Kiki Jiki. You can also utilize other cards that can manipulate your graveyard by bringing creatures back, such as Whispers of Blood Litigator. You can also use Krenko Mob Boss to create those copies too if you're looking to manipulate more goblins onto the battlefield like we kind of talked about already. The other way to kind of utilize them is if you're able to manipulate creature types. Like with the new Masswood Nexus, you can essentially play something like Xanthid Necromancer or even Bishop of the Wings to just make your creatures every creature type. This will allow you to keep sacrificing your creatures because they match every type on there for the Xanthid and Bishop, that they can essentially just keep creating bodies. You can keep sacrificing, and that will allow every opponent to die there on the spot as well. Now, if you just want an all-star goblin crew for your combos, look no further than Grumgoli with Putrid Goblin. As long as you have a sacrifice fodder like the Sling Gang Lieutenant or the Goblin Bombardment that we talked about, you can essentially sacrifice Putrid Goblin over and over to ping your opponents, because as soon as he enters the battlefield as a sacrifice fodder, he's going to get a -1 counter, but with Grumgoli out there, he's going to essentially get a +1 counter, which will then cancel out the counters. You can then immediately sacrifice him again. He'll come back onto the battlefield. You can do this infinite amount of times, thus draining your opponents of all their life as well. And Putrid Goblin himself can combo off with a lot of other cards as well, and my favorite one being Machias, allowing him to get Undying, which will then cancel out the counters. And as long as you have something that can sacrifice him to add mana, you can essentially get yourself infinite mana that way as well. You can also utilize things like Altar of Dementia to make your opponents mill their entire deck, or you can use things like Viscous Seer to scry your cards to make sure you're getting nothing but bombs on top. Some ways to utilize him as well without Machias would have to be Grumgoli like we talked about, or using Thran Vigil. But the most common way to utilize him is just as sacrifice fodder. So use that Goblin Bombardment, get rid of him a bunch of times, and just ping the table out the entire time, thus winning you the game. You probably have guessed what the best Goblin card is at this point, with it being utilized in pretty much every combo out there that has to utilize goblins. It has to be Goblin Bombardment. It allows you to get rid of goblins as just sacrifice fodder, so you can ping out the table and make sure that you get rid of every opponent there, as long as you can create enough goblins to make sure that you can destroy everyone there. A close second to Goblin Bombardment that we didn't really touch up on has to be Impact Tremors. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, so if you're able to make infinite bodies on the field, you'll be able to destroy every opponent there as well. These 2 cards are a must-have for Goblin tribal decks because they allow you to just win games out of nowhere very easily. Hey, thanks for sticking around towards the end. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found it entertaining. I'm going to be trying to do more videos like this on either tribal combos or just cards I feel like are generally some of the better cards out there. But yeah, be sure to watch out for those goblins because you never know, they may get you with your helmet off.
とにかくどっちまで